Welcome back to Media Curious. I'm still Karen Kring, and today I'm welcoming Laura Washington to talk business, to talk shop. Hey, Laura.
Hey, how are you, Karen?
I'm
Good
glad.
to see you.
Thanks for coming. Laura is a columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times and political analyst for ABC7. She specializes in African American affairs, local and national politics, social justice, race, and racism. She was press secretary for the late Mayor Harold Washington. She was publisher and editor for the nationally recognized investigative news outlet, The Chicago Reporter, from 1990 to 2002. She was an investigative unit producer at Channel 2 News and was a correspondent with WTTW Chicago Tonight. She was also an op-ed columnist for the Chicago Tribune, but is currently with the Sun-Times, and her column has been published there since 2001. Laura serves on several boards, including that of the Field Museum and Block Club Chicago. She's won numerous awards and was named a Dorothy Stork finalist for the Dorothy Stork Award. And Newsweek named her amongst the 100 people to watch in the 21st century. Hey, Laura. Yay.
Hi, Karen. The 21st century thing sounds so long ago, doesn't it? I feel like we've already skipped into the next century.
But I also go grocery shopping, and I also, how much could we have? So were you related to the late Mayor Harold Washington?
No, people used to always ask me that, especially when I was working for him, and I would say no. If I had been related to him, there's no way I would have had a chance of getting a job at City Hall. Right. Because even though there's all kinds of nepotism and corruption and ethical lapses in City Hall, as we know it today and yesterday, they wouldn't have let Harold Washington get away with that. Right.
So you and I said we would talk after the election. So do we think the election's over?
Well, for some people, it's probably never going to be over. Perhaps for the current president, it's not going to be over. But I think all wise heads agree, except for the president's sycophants, that it is over and that Joe Biden is the president-elect. And, that's okay because it's been a wild run. It's been a wild 4 years, and actually more than 4 years because you got to go back to the previous campaign, which was a couple of years. Right. It's time for things to be over.
Yes. Time for other things.
Yes.
So what were you doing election night? What were your duties?
I was, election night is like everything else in this new COVID world was like no election night I've ever covered. I was sitting here in my apartment in front of my laptop doing, following the results, making calls and doing I do a lot of political analysis for ABC7. So I was doing election night analysis that night. But again, I'm right at the laptop. I'm used to being in the studio, where the action is and hearing the reports coming in from the field. And I was doing that, but I was doing it all right here on my computer.
Yeah. Very, very odd times.
Yeah.
So that's one way the pandemic has influenced your work. How has the pandemic been treating you?
It's been okay. I'm trying to, my whole motto for months has been just take one day at a time and try not to get too freaked out by all the questions because there's so much uncertainty. But yeah, all of our work, no matter what profession you're in, even if you're in a profession that's where you're in the center of things like the medical care profession, it's just changed. I think in many ways changed forever. The Sun-Times newsroom right now is completely empty. There might be a couple people come through for maintenance as checks, but no one is in the newsroom. We're all working from home. And, that's a challenge. That's a challenge, especially for me as someone who is a reporter and editor has always felt like you got to be out in the street. You got to be, wearing out the shoe leather. You got to be talking to people, doing stuff in person, and not being able to do that and still feel like you're really covering the news well. It's a challenge, and I think we do. I think we as journalists we've done some things heroically and magnificently in this context, and in other ways we've fallen down. And I don't think it's necessarily our fault. It's just because of the nature of the restrictions and the nature of the world that's out there.
Right. As a photojournalist, I'm feeling it. You know, it's
Sure.
it's hard to make pictures. It's extra challenging to make visuals in this due to the pandemic. Let's shift a little bit. You hold a BA and an MA in journalism from Northwestern's Medill School of
Right.
Journalism. When did you decide journalism was a good idea and was going to be the life for you?
One thing about that Medill School thing is, the name of the school has changed over like
I
the
did not
last
know
5 or 6
this.
years. It used to be
Okay.
called the Medill School of Journalism.
Yeah.
Now it's just called Medill. I think it may be the Medill School or Medill, and that there's a whole backstory behind that. But basically, it involves the issue of the fact that the school didn't just teach journalism; it teach communications, public relations,
Mm-hmm.
broadcast. And so the feeling was that the name should not pigeonhole it, but should represent all those areas and disciplines. But you could imagine us fierce journalists didn't like that. What do
Yeah.
you mean you're taking our profession out of that name? So
Yeah.
just want to make sure we know we still do journalists. We do journalism, we do them well. And that's actually how I got started in journalism. I actually had intended to go into medicine.
Oh,
And I was really interested in the sciences when I was in high school. I loved dissecting frogs and all that other stuff that a lot of people hated in the sciences. And I had actually applied to colleges with that in mind. And then I had a teacher in my senior year, I might have even been the last semester, who asked me, it was an English teacher, and I did a lot of writing in the class, and she said, had you ever thought about being a writer? And it had never occurred to me that you could make a living doing that.
mm-hmm.
And the rest is history. And I ended up pursuing that. And I think the journalism part came from my own growing up on the south side of Chicago and always feeling very strongly about wanting to work toward equity and wanting to right the wrongs that I saw growing up in a working class neighborhood where things were not just what they should be, where there was a big difference between what you saw in terms of amenities, in terms of access, in terms of opportunity from the south side to the north side. So I wanted to change that. I wanted to sort of make that a part of my career, making changes. So I thought journalism would be the perfect way to do that.
I heard Renee Ferguson once call being a journalist means being an activist. It's not you have to be gutsy, and you have to be a stalwart to do the job, because there's a lot of if you're looking to create some change or looking to expose certain things, there's some people are not interested in having that exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the whole concept of activism in journalism is something that people are beginning to come around to, but growing up in professionally and throughout the vast majority of my career, that was a dirty word.
Oh, yeah.
If you were an activist, if you were an advocate, then you weren't objective. You weren't telling the whole story. You had a bias. And of course, that's ridiculous. We all bring our personal biases and experiences and histories and perspectives. And that's the point. That's what makes us good. I mean, you need to be fair. You need to be balanced. You need to be accurate. But if you're for racial justice, is that bad? Is that a bad thing? Does that make you biased? No, that's right. We should all want to achieve that. So activism should be seen as a positive thing in our field.
Mm-hmm. As journalists, we have a relationship with our readers and our viewers. What do you think holding up your end of the relationship means, and what do you think you owe readers?
Well, it's just, I guess I would say what I just said a minute ago. You owe readers that you're going to be fair and accurate, and you're going to do your best to tell the story in a way that's compelling, but also clear, and is also truthful. And I guess for me as a columnist, I'm always looking for ways to open eyes, or to not necessarily convince someone or change someone's mind, but giving them a different perspective that maybe they hadn't thought of before, a different way of looking at things. I run into people all the time on the street who recognize me, and they say, I like what you do. I don't always agree with you, but I like it. I don't want you to always agree with me. I just want you to hear me and hear the perspective, and maybe that you're going to learn something new. And maybe you'll come at this with fresh eyes. And I try to do that in my own work. So I think that's what I would love to communicate with my readers.
Mm-hmm. You're a busy person. While your introduction was long, there's some positions I did not mention, like the Ida B. Wells Barnett a university professor at the DePaul that you were for a while, and you were also a visiting fellow at the University of Chicago's Institute for Politics. And though I did mention the Field Museum and the Block Club, again, you're busy. What inspires you to get involved with the Field Museum and serve on boards?
Well, I, as you mentioned earlier, I spent a good part of my career at the Chicago Reporter, which is a nonprofit news organization, investigative news organization. And for most of its life, it's going to be 50 years old in a couple of years. For most of its life, it was almost the only game in town when it came to nonprofit journalism. Now there's, that whole field, that whole arena has blossomed, and there's, at least maybe 10 or 20 nonprofit news organizations out there. But because I work there, and because a part of my job as editor and publisher was to raise money, to engage with foundations, to engage with other nonprofit organizations that we covered, I got very engaged and interested in that as a place where I thought I could also do some good. So sitting on boards was something that kind of came naturally out of that. One of the first boards I sat on was the board of the Woods Fund of Chicago, which is a longtime social justice funder in the city. And because they were funding the Chicago Reporter, they asked me to join their board, which was something that was kind of like, that's kind of a weird thing, isn't it? To be on the board, be on the board of a foundation that's giving you money, but yeah, I'll do it. and
right.
and it turned, and so that's how I got engaged in that. And it's a great opportunity because it brings me story ideas too. All these relationships I have on these boards give me another opportunity to connect with people in ways that I wouldn't otherwise as a journalist. So it even broadens and expands my world in terms of the journalism that I do.
Brilliant, brilliant. Can you think of a time when you said to yourself, this is why I do this job? It strikes me that maybe people coming up to you and saying, I don't always agree with everything you say, but I appreciate what you're saying. Maybe that's a moment, but maybe you can think of another moment or two where you say, this is why this job's important. This is...
Because again, coming back to asking the question that doesn't necessarily get asked, or thinking about an issue from a different perspective. We're Donald Trump, for example. Right now, we're in Illinois and in Chicago. We are, in the world of anti-Trump, and a lot of people, particularly in the Chicago area, this is a blue city, a blue state. They don't understand Trump and his attraction. And so what I've tried to do occasionally is try to write about that, and not write about it from we hate Trump and this is why Trump's bad, but write about it from the other perspective. And one of the columns I'm really proud of that I did a few years ago during the first campaign was where I talked to a gentleman who works in my building, who works in our receiving room in my building, who is a huge Trumper to this very moment. He loves Trump, would walk over coals for Trump. And I talked to him about why. And, I did all these things where I threw all these questions at him, like, but he's not really a successful businessman, but he doesn't pay his taxes, but he's had problems with women, but, and he had responses to all of it. And he made a very cogent and very powerful and very personal argument for why he thinks Trump cares about him. And I wrote about that. And people were like mystified. Well, where did you find this guy? Well, that guy was one of the guys that got him elected the first time. And so that's, that's the kind of thing that, you want to be able to get outside your own comfort zone, your own biases, and tell stories that people need to hear.
And you're the kind of reporter that pays attention to everything going on around you. So you knew that guy. You found that guy.
Sure.
How many people in your building might pass him and not have a conversation with them? But you were a
plenty of them, because they don't want to hear about it. You got to hear stuff that you don't want to hear, that you don't just don't agree with.
Well, good for you for listening and sharing that column. Yeah.
Well, as all of our colleagues, we're always looking for stories, and story ideas are everywhere. You're living them every day, and the ones that that you least suspect, the ones that are closest to you, are probably some of the best stories. The other stories that I like best are ones that make me angry. If I read something in the news, or I hear about something and it makes me angry, that's a good column.
Yeah.
It's the fire out.
I'm going to work it out in print.
Exactly.
That's right.
Good therapy.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think of the havoc being wreaked on the news industry these days? I mean, it's come from our funding sources, and then things, some media outlets are closing, some are being gobbled up by investors. Where do you think, just what do you think about all of it? I mean, some of the questions I have are, whose responsibility is it to strengthen the Fourth Estate, to support journalism? That's one of the questions I constantly am asking myself. And I think journalists doing their job to their fullest, to the best they can, is part of that. But I've got other ideas as well. I was wondering what some of your ideas might be.
Well, I think it's all of our responsibility. Whenever I meet, speak to groups, and they ask me about what, and they say, why aren't you doing this? Why are reporters doing that? I'm like, well, you're our readers, you're our viewers. You need to tell us what you want. You can't be passive consumers. And and if you're unhappy, you need to respond. And you can respond with your fingers. You can respond with your pocketbook and not support us. But we need to hear from you. We can't operate in a vacuum. And I think that you asked me earlier how do I feel about the business? Yeah, there's all these challenges and pressures. You didn't mention the fake news stuff. I think that's been one of the biggest, most recent threats. It's not like we don't have no problems, just keep staying alive and paying the bills. But now we've got to deal with people who say that we're phony, that we're frauds, that we're making stuff up. And of course, that's couldn't be further from the truth. But I think we need to remember that, there has to be a Fourth Estate. There has to be somebody that's going to be a watchdog there. And the thing that gets me so energized in these times is the fact that we are seen as essential professionals. There's, because of COVID, there's supposedly essential people that don't necessarily need to be working, and not essential, and then essential, the duty to be working. And of course, I wouldn't put us in a category with the medical field, with our heroic doctors and nurses and all the people who are keeping us healthy and alive. But we are essential to telling the stories about COVID and what it means, and what it means and how it's impacting the world. And I think that makes us, kind of maybe little minor heroes. And maybe it will re-inspire people to understand why it's so important for us to have a Fourth Estate and to have journalists to tell those stories and to share the information that needs to be out there.
To shift back a little bit, you had mentioned you were interested in the sciences when you were in high school. If you couldn't do journalism anymore, is there any profession you think you'd like to take on?
I always have a little regret that I didn't go into the sciences and maybe become a doctor. And that's been nudging me a lot lately, obviously because of the heroism I'm seeing in these hospitals and in the medical field every day. Boy, I mean, our lives are going to be saved. Our lives are being saved as we speak every moment by people in the medical field. And I just wonder all the time, what it would have been like to have gone in that direction. In many ways, terrifying from what I hear and what I see, terrifying, exhausting, but so heroic. And so, I don't think I want to go back and go to medical school, but I always wondered what would I be doing right now? Vaccine.
Hey, anything we should be talking about that that I missed asking? I know that I missed asking you how you get your story ideas, but you kind of answered that within other questions. What else should we be talking about?
Well, I wanted to mention the Chicago Reporter because the Chicago Reporter is facing some challenges now. As I mentioned, it's going to be 50 years old in a couple years. It was founded in 1972 by John McDermott, the late John McDermott, and it is a nonprofit publication that's housed at the Community Renewal Society, which has been its supporter and parent organization for 48 years. Recently, the reporters run into some trouble with that parent organization, which for reasons that no one clearly understands, they removed the editor and publisher and shut down the Chicago Reporter, and it has not published since the middle of September with no explanation. The only explanation we've heard from Community Renewal Society's board and leadership is that they want to restructure, they want to reorganize. But this is, as you know, Karen, this is just unacceptable.
Yeah.
The Reporter's always been an independent, powerful, investigative publication that has told the truth, that is in our focus has always been on race and racial equity.
Exactly.
How could you shut down a voice like that ever, but certainly at
this
time.
year, in this year of the
this
racial
moment,
reckoning, right?
This moment, and I don't think it has anything to do with the moment in that way. I don't know what it has to do with, but the alumni of the Reporter, along with John McDermott's son, John McDermott Jr., who is a superb community organizer, a whole group of us have started to organize a Save the Chicago Reporter campaign. And we're out there doing petition drives, raising money, doing media, and trying to get the Community Renewal Society to respond and restore the Chicago Reporter. So I just wanted to share that, and we have a website called SaveTheChicagoReporter.com.
Oh, good.
Please go there, and please, there's plenty of more information about what you can do. We have a petition you can sign and get the word out, because we can't afford it. Chicago Reporter is a model, as I said, it's a role model for all the nonprofit news organizations that are thriving today, and it was thriving before this happened. So we got to bring it back.
Yeah, that's a kick in the teeth to the Chicago community, not just the journalism community, but the greater community that cares about race and equity. And
absolutely, and we've had great response from civic leaders, community activists, just regular readers and supporters, and we're taking on the charge, and we're going to turn things around. Good. With your help.
Good. And thanks for mentioning the website. So I'm hoping some folks hearing this will go and respond there.
SaveTheChicagoReporter.com.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you for spending your time with me. And
thank you, Karen. This has been great.
Media Curious crowd. And I look forward to next time we cross paths. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Okay, we're out. Thanks again for being media curious. If you'd like to get in touch with me or with Laura Washington, here's our contact information. It's also in the info box below. Special shout out now to Media Curious collaborators. The oh-so-talented Jane Ricciardi does post-production work on each episode. The Kimtastic word nerd Kim O'Brien edits all the notes that go with each episode. Can TV cablecasts each episode periodically on Channel 27. And the Event Tours and ChicagoPublicSquare.com help talk up the series. If you like what we're doing here, please comment, like, subscribe, or share. If you'd like to be a sponsor, let's talk soon.